She called her parents on a Friday afternoon. They didn't answer. So she left a voicemail. Just a few words. Bright, happy words. Good news. Good news. I'll call you Sunday. Her parents replayed that message for years. That Sunday never came. And to this day, nearly 30 years later, they still don't know what the good news was. Her name was KRISTEN SMART. She was 19 years old. And this is the story of what happened to her, who took her, why it took 26 years to get justice, and why the most important question in this case still has no answer. If you are new to this channel, welcome to Cold Case Unearthed, where we dig into the cases the system buried and the victims the world forgot. Hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. Drop a comment below and tell me which cold case you want us to unearth next. And share this video before we go any further, because the more people who watch, the more pressure stays on the cases that still need answers. Now, let's go back to California. Before we talk about what happened to KRISTEN, you need to understand one thing about who she was. Because this case only makes sense when you understand the kind of person the world lost. KRISTEN SMART was not the kind of person who disappeared quietly. She was 6 feet and 1 inch tall. Quiet confidence. The kind that makes a person feel safe going places alone. She signed every single email she ever wrote with the same line, "Live your life as an exclamation, not an explanation." And she didn't just say it. She lived it. London at 16. Venezuela as an exchange student. Hawaii the summer before college. She worked as a lifeguard and spent her days in the ocean. She walked into rooms full of strangers and introduced herself. She was brave in the specific way that only truly free people are brave, not recklessly, but completely. Like the world was a place that had been made for her to explore. She enrolled at CALPOLY San Luis Obispo in the fall of 1995. She started in off-campus apartments and hated it. By January, she had moved into Muir Hall, room 20, right at the heart of campus. Red bricks. Busy hallways. She called it a fresh start. She dyed her natural blonde hair dark brown, like she was trying on a new version of herself. She tried on new names too, Roxy, Trixie, Marisol. She was doing what every freshman does. Testing who she could become in a place where nobody had already decided who she was. But the fresh start was harder than she expected. Difficult classes. ADHD. A 5 a.m. lifeguard shift that meant waking up at 4:20 every single morning. She called her mom and admitted she was falling behind. She begged to drop out. Her mother wrote her a long letter back. The world of opportunities is at your fingertips. Get back on the horse. KRISTEN stayed. And that matters. Because a girl who almost quit and chose to stay was a girl who still believed things could get better. On the afternoon of May 24th, they did. She had missed a biology exam earlier in the semester. That Friday, she found out she could make it up. For someone who had been grinding and fighting just to stay afloat, that one small piece of news felt enormous. At 5:30 in the evening, she called her parents. They didn't pick up. Good news. Good news. I'll call you Sunday. She was happy. Genuinely, purely happy. And she wanted to celebrate. Memorial Day weekend. Most of campus had emptied out. Her closest friend on campus was a fellow freshman named Margarita Campos, another young woman with ADHD, also grinding through a tough first year. KRISTEN knocked on her door. Come out with me. Let's find a party. Margarita didn't want to. She was exhausted. But KRISTEN pushed, and eventually Margarita gave in. One small detail that would later matter enormously. KRISTEN had no ID on her that night. No wallet. No money. No credit cards. She didn't even have her own dorm key, she had lost it recently. The only key she had was Margarita's, tucked into her sock. She was carrying nothing that connected her to who she was. Their first stop was a small gathering, a few guys on a couch, video games on the television. Margarita looked around and thought, I stopped studying for this. They left. But KRISTEN wasn't done. She wanted to check frat row. Margarita had had enough. She handed over her dorm key, turned back toward the hall, and that was that. KRISTEN watched her go. Then she kept walking. Alone. Independent. Unstoppable. Exactly the way she always was. About 1/10 of a mile further, she found it. A birthday party at an unofficial Sigma Chi house. Around 60 people. Music thumping from inside. Red cups everywhere. She walked in alone. She introduced herself as Roxy. She was social and laughing, pulling a guy named Trevor Bolter aside to tell him she had a crush on a basketball player across the room. She was having fun. But here is the detail that investigators would later circle back to again and again. Multiple people at that party said they barely saw Kristen with a drink in her hand all night. She was not a heavy drinker. She sometimes pretended to drink at parties just to fit in. By most accounts, she had very little alcohol that evening. Which is why, when Tim Davis, one of the party hosts, walked outside at 2 in the morning to start clearing people out and found KRISTEN SMART lying on the neighbor's front lawn, completely unconscious, too cold to stand, barely aware of where she was, something did not add up. A girl who barely drank. Out cold. Before the party even officially ended. Tim helped her up. Another student, Cheryl Anderson, offered to walk with them back toward campus. The three of them started moving through the dark streets. And then, out of nowhere, a figure appeared behind them. He said his name was Paul Flores. He said he was going the same direction. He stepped forward, put his arm around Kristen's bare waist like he already knew her, and told Tim and Cheryl he could help. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He just inserted himself. And nobody at that party had been watching him all night. Stay with me. Because what happened in the next 40 yards changed everything. 40 yards. That is the exact distance between Paul Flores's dormitory and the front door of Kristen's building. Not a mile. Not a dark highway. 40 yards on a flat, lit path. A walk that takes less than 30 seconds. She never made it. Here is Paul Flores's official story. He walked Kristen as far as his own dorm, Santa Lucia Hall. He stood there. He watched her walk the remaining 40 yards to Muir Hall on her own. He saw her go inside. He went to his room. He went to sleep. Clean. Simple. Completely unverifiable. Because Tim Davis had already split off earlier, he had a car nearby and drove home. And Cheryl Anderson had turned off toward her own dorm. But before she did, she watched Paul and Kristen disappear together down that dark path. Kristen barely able to stand. Paul's arm locked around her waist. Steering her. Not guiding the way a helpful stranger would, steering her, keeping her close, keeping her moving. Cheryl had felt uncomfortable enough to stay longer than she planned. She did not want to leave Kristen alone with him. She held on until she literally reached her own building, at which point she had no real choice. She asked Paul to promise he would get Kristen safely to her room. He promised. Then she watched them walk into the darkness together. After that, no witnesses. No cameras. Nothing. That same night, Kristen was supposed to return Margarita's key. She never came back. By Saturday morning, Kristen's roommate Crystal returned and found Kristen's backpack sitting exactly where she had left it Friday. Belongings untouched. It looked like nobody had slept there. Crystal told herself Kristen would turn up by afternoon. Afternoon passed. Evening passed. By Sunday, the silence wasn't just strange. It was deafening. Friends started asking around campus. Has anyone seen her? Every answer was the same. No. On Monday morning, they finally called campus police. Please. Our friend is missing. Campus police refused to take the report. They said Kristen had probably gone somewhere for the long weekend. Students do this all the time, they said. And then, in a detail that is almost impossible to absorb, they suggested she might have gone to Hawaii. Because she loved Hawaii. A girl with no packed bags, no clothes taken, no wallet, no ID, no money, no credit cards had spontaneously booked a flight to Hawaii for the weekend. That was the official position of the campus police. Her friends tried local police next. Same response. No urgency. No report. No movement. Inside the Smart family home, the hours were passing very differently. Stan and Denise had expected their Sunday call. It didn't come. They told themselves she got busy, she forgot. Then campus police called asking if Kristen was home with them. Denise Smart said later, that's when a mother's instinct kicks in and you say, this is not right. Because Denise knew her daughter. Kristen had called every Sunday without fail. She would never travel without telling someone. This was not Kristen's behavior. The police tried to reassure her. She probably just forgot to check in. They were telling a mother that her daughter, who left behind her wallet, her ID, her medication, her backpack, had simply forgotten to call. A missing person report was not filed until 4 days after Kristen was last seen alive. For days where Paul Flores moved freely. For days where his dorm room sat unsecured. For days where anything, evidence, clothing, a mattress, could be moved, cleaned, or disposed of without a single officer paying attention. Kristen's father, Stan, drove down to campus himself. He walked those paths. He put up flyers with his own hands. He and Denise had already accepted what should never have been necessary. If anyone was going to find their daughter, it was going to be them. When investigators finally began speaking to people at the party, every single account pointed the same direction. The last person seen with KRISTEN SMART was Paul Flores. He walked her home. He was alone with her. And yet, Paul Flores was not formally interviewed until 6 days after she vanished. But here is what makes that even harder to accept. When investigators did finally write their initial incident report, this is what they chose to focus on. Smart does not have any close friends at CALPOLY. Smart appeared to be under the influence of alcohol on Friday night. Smart was talking with and socializing with several different males at the party. Smart lives her life in her own way, not conforming to typical teenage behavior. The police report spent more words describing Kristen's social life, who she talked to, how she behaved, whether she had close friends, than it spent on the one person who was alone with her when she disappeared. Paul Flores was left completely unbothered for 6 days. KRISTEN SMART was reduced to a character judgment before she was even officially declared missing. When investigators finally brought Paul in, they noticed something immediately. Something that had no business being on his face 4 days after a birthday party. A black eye. Deep. Dark. Obvious. They asked him how he got it. He said basketball. His basketball friend said something different entirely. He had the black eye before the game even started. When pushed, he changed his story. Said he hit his eye on his steering wheel at 2 in the morning while removing a car stereo. A man 5 feet and 10 inches tall somehow hitting his eye on his own steering wheel hard enough to bruise it deeply. He also had scratches on the back of his hand. Rug burn on both knees. None of it added up. And when investigators pointed out the lie, Paul Flores shrugged and said it was a small detail that didn't matter. This wasn't a man who made one bad decision on one bad night. This was a man who had been practicing for years. Hiding in plain sight. Doing exactly enough to make people uncomfortable, but never quite enough for anyone to stop him. Paul Flores grew up in Arroyo Grande, California. His parents tried. But when Paul was in middle school, he attacked another student so violently that the boy ended up hospitalized for an extended period. The court recommended anger management. His parents declined. They did not believe their son needed it. That was the first time someone looked at what Paul Flores was capable of and chose to look away. It would not be the last. By high school, Paul had no friends. Not one. His parents were so concerned about his isolation that they bought a pool table, hoping neighborhood kids would come over, hoping their son would find his place. Nobody came. Paul graduated without a single close friendship. His classmates didn't just ignore him. They actively avoided him. The nickname they gave him, Scary Paul, wasn't a joke. It was a warning, passed between students in hallways. He got into CALPOLY not because of his grades. He was failing food science, a D- by his own academic record. He got in because the university gave preference to local applicants. That was the only reason he was there. And at college, without the social structure of a hometown to contain him, his behavior began to escalate. Paul's pattern with women followed 3 distinct stages. Not random. Not impulsive. A system. First was access. He showed up to parties uninvited every weekend. He wasn't there to socialize. He was there to find someone vulnerable. He would drink alone in his dorm room first, then wander campus until he found a gathering with women in it. Second was pressure. Once he identified someone, he wouldn't approach directly. He would insert himself. Make physical contact without asking. A hand on a shoulder. An arm around a waist. If a woman pushed back, he wouldn't leave. He would follow her across the room and try again. Multiple women at Kristen's party that night reported exactly this. Cheryl Anderson's friends had a name for him long before that night. They called him Chester the Molester. That nickname didn't come from one incident. It came from a pattern so consistent that women on campus had begun warning each other about him as routine. Third was isolation. 5 months before Kristen disappeared, December of 1995, Paul climbed the exterior trellis of an apartment building in the middle of the night and attempted to get onto a female student's balcony. She saw him. She called the police. Officers came, told him to get down, and sent him home. No charges. No follow-up. 3 women in that same building later reported Paul had been calling them repeatedly, harassing them, refusing to stop. Nothing was done. This is what hiding in plain sight looks like. He was doing everything in the open. And the system kept looking the other way. At the party on May 24th, Paul's behavior followed the same pattern, only accelerated. He showed up uninvited. Tim Davis witnessed a loud crash and turned to find Paul on the ground on top of Kristen. When Trevor Bolter came out of a side room where he had been talking to Kristen, Paul was standing directly outside the door, immediately interrogating him about what had happened inside. On the walk home, Paul repeatedly told Cheryl to go ahead without them. He did not want a witness. And even at the moment Cheryl finally left, he asked her for a kiss. She said no. He asked for a hug. She said no again. And then she watched him walk into the darkness with Kristen. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment right now with the words "I'm still here." Let's see who is truly following this story. Because what comes next is where this case gets darker, deeper, and more infuriating than almost anything you have ever heard. On June 19th, 4 weeks after Kristen vanished, investigators finally sat Paul Flores down for a formal interview. Midway through, Paul told them he needed to leave early. He had somewhere to be. The investigator asked twice. Paul finally answered. He said he needed to go clean up some concrete at his mother's house. The investigators didn't think much of it. They didn't know yet that Paul's parents were separated. His father, Ruben, lived at his own property in Arroyo Grande. His mother, Susan, lived separately, at a rental house on East Branch Street, about a mile away. Police had assumed Susan lived with Ruben. They searched Ruben's property. They left the Branch Street house completely untouched. So when Paul said he needed to go clean up concrete at his mother's house, nobody in that room understood what he was actually saying. Not Ruben's house. A completely different address. One that had never been searched. Paul's roommate Derek had come back from the holiday weekend and heard about Kristen's disappearance. He asked Paul, half joking, "What did you do with her?" Paul looked at him and said, "She's at my house having lunch with my mom." Derek thought it was strange. He mentioned it to investigators. It went into a file. For years, nobody connected the dots. By the time investigators untangled the geography, months had passed. That August, Susan put the Branch Street house up for rent and moved back in with Ruben temporarily. A young couple, Joe and Mary Lacier, moved in that October. From their very first day, Susan pointed to an aluminum trash can outside. "Don't touch it. Don't use it. Someone will collect it." The next day, Ruben Flores arrived and took it away personally. A trash can specific enough to warn new tenants about. Important enough for Ruben to drive over and collect himself. In the weeks that followed, letters began arriving at the Branch Street house. Not addressed to the Laciers, but to the Flores family. Strangers writing in. "You know what your son did. Come forward. Tell the truth." Mary kept every letter. She created a file. And then one morning, washing her car in the driveway, she noticed something near her front tire. An earring. Small. Silver. A turquoise stone set into the face. And on the back, a dark reddish smudge. A dried fingerprint in what appeared to be blood. Mary had seen Kristen's missing person posters around the area. She recognized the match immediately. She put it in a small bag. When investigators came to the property months later, they took it with them. It was never officially logged as evidence. It was placed in a desk drawer inside the sheriff's department. And lost. When Kristen's family finally learned about the earring through their civil attorney, they drove to the police department and demanded to see it. Investigators told them it was gone. They didn't just lose her jewelry. They lost the only physical piece of Kristen that had fought its way back to the surface. But the earring wasn't the only ghost Mary Lacier lived within that house. Every morning, consistently, reliably, long before the sun hit the California coast, the house began to speak. At approximately 4:20 in the morning, Mary was woken by a beeping sound rising from the garden. Faint. Mechanical. Cold. Like a digital watch alarm going off beneath the ground. She and her mother searched the backyard at night. They crawled along the fence line. They pressed close to the soil. They never found it. After several months, the beeping stopped. KRISTEN SMART reported to her lifeguard shift at 5 in the morning every single day. She would have set her watch alarm for 4:20 to be there on time. That watch, if it was hers, had been underground. Counting out mornings she would never wake up for. Until the battery ran out. And the garden went silent. In the backyard, Joe Lacier tried to grow flowers in a large planter box built against the back wall. 3 of the smaller boxes grew fine. The fourth, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, killed everything he planted. He dug down to find out why. Beneath the soil was a solid layer of cement. A neighbor confirmed those planter boxes had been constructed during the summer of 1996. The same summer KRISTEN disappeared. That same neighbor remembered watching Paul Flores, late at night, with at least one other person, digging in that backyard for approximately 5 hours. He watched them lower something into the hole. Something wrapped like a rolled carpet. Something so heavy it took 2 men to carry. He watched them cover it with dirt. He watched them pour concrete over the top. A garage was later built directly over that spot, blocking all access from the backyard to the driveway. When police finally searched Paul's home in San Pedro years later, they found something on his computer that reframed everything. A folder. Inside it were videos, at least 10 different women, all unconscious, all filmed without their knowledge. Paul had used incapacitating substances to exploit them without their consent. The folder had a name. He called it practice. Not a mistake. Not a moment of weakness. Practice. As in he had been rehearsing. As in he had been doing this long enough that he thought of it as a skill. Date rape drugs were also found in his home. Multiple women who encountered Paul in the years after KRISTEN's disappearance came forward with the same story. A drink that tasted strange. Waking up somewhere unfamiliar. Piecing together what had been done to them while unconscious. KRISTEN was not the first. The evidence makes that unmistakably clear. When KRISTEN's family filed a wrongful death civil lawsuit, the one legal mechanism they had to force Paul into a room, he sat down across from their attorney and said exactly 4 words on the record. His name. After that, 27 times, the same line. On the advice of my attorney, I refused to answer that question based on the 5th Amendment of the United States Constitution. His family's names. His address. Whether he had ever been to CALPOLY. 27 times. Silence. And then, sensing the walls beginning to close, Paul Flores tried to enlist in the United States Navy. He wanted out of California. Out of reach. Out of the story entirely. KRISTEN's family got there first. They made sure the Navy knew exactly who Paul Flores was. In 2014, 18 years after KRISTEN SMART vanished, there was a water leak in Ruben Flores's kitchen. A plumber came to fix it. The repair required access beneath the back deck. Ruben Flores refused to let him go under there. He let the leak go unrepaired. He let his kitchen stay damaged. Rather than allow one plumber, for 1 hour, beneath that deck, 18 years had passed, and whatever was under there still needed protecting. Chris Lambert had driven past KRISTEN's billboard thousands of times. He had grown up 8 miles from CALPOLY. That smiling photograph, the reward offer, the phone number, had been part of the landscape of his entire childhood. In 2019, working as a CBS News consultant and musician, he finally searched the case properly. What he found wasn't a mystery. It was a verdict the system had refused to deliver. One suspect. 23 years. No arrest. He told his girlfriend, half joking, "I think I'm going to solve this." Then a friend, a writer who had grown up nearby, sent him an email that made the joke feel suddenly serious. "I can't believe I never told you. I went to high school with the guy who walked her home that night. We all called him Scary Paul." On September 29, 2019, Chris Lambert launched a podcast called Your Own Backyard. He was not a detective. He had no subpoena power. He could not compel a single person to speak to him. What he had was a microphone and one question he kept asking publicly, week after week. What actually happened to KRISTEN SMART? The first episode streamed nearly 75,000 times in a single day. Here is what the system had failed to understand for 23 years. People do not walk into police stations and volunteer information about frightening men. Not when those men are still free. Not when 2 decades of experience have shown that reporting Paul Flores leads to nothing. But people will talk to someone who is not wearing a badge. Chris opened each episode with a simple, clear reminder. The statute of limitations has expired on everything except murder. If you come forward, you will not be charged with anything. That assurance unlocked doors that official investigation had never managed to open. Witnesses who had never been contacted by police came forward. Women who had encountered Paul Flores in the years after Kristen disappeared began sharing what had happened to them. People who had lived near the Flores properties. People who had been at the party that night. They called in. They emailed. They reached out. The system had spent 23 years waiting for Paul Flores to break. Chris Lambert spent several months finding everyone the system had never bothered to ask. One of those people was Neil Van Estate, an Australian exchange student who had been at CALPOLY the night Kristen disappeared. He had reported what he saw in 1996. Investigators dismissed his account and set it aside. For 23 years, his testimony sat in a file, unread. What he had seen was this. Riding his bicycle back from the university library at approximately 2 in the morning, he passed Sierra Madre Hall and looked through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the lobby. 2 people inside. A man and a woman. The woman was trying to get away. The man was physically preventing her from leaving. He described the man as approximately 5 feet and 10 inches tall. The woman several inches taller. Close to 6 feet. Paul Flores was 5 feet and 10 inches tall. KRISTEN SMART was 6 feet and 1 inch tall. Neil Van Estate had witnessed the struggle. He had tried to report it. And for 23 years, nobody listened. But the testimony that cracked this case open completely came from a woman named Jennifer Hudson. She had been 17 years old in the summer of 1996, just weeks after Kristen disappeared. She was at a skate park with a group that included Paul Flores when a radio bulletin came on about the ongoing search for KRISTEN SMART. Paul Flores turned toward Jennifer. He was calm. Almost casual. I was at a party with that girl. I actually was there. And I did it. And I put Kristen under a skate ramp at my parents' house. Jennifer waited for him to laugh. For any signal that this was dark humor. He didn't laugh. He held her gaze with eyes she would later describe in a courtroom, through tears, as cold and empty. The kind of look that communicates clearly, I am telling you this because I know you will never tell anyone. She was 17. She was frightened. She eventually bought a gun, genuinely afraid that Paul Flores might decide she knew too much. She carried that secret for 23 years. It was only when a friend told her about your own backyard, and she heard Chris Lambert explain that witnesses were protected, that she finally made the call. A 17-year-old girl had been sitting on a confession for over 2 decades. Not because she didn't want justice. But because the system had never given her a reason to believe that coming forward would lead to anything except danger. The podcast also made the Flores family nervous in ways investigators could now use. In 2019, police obtained a court order to monitor Paul's communications. In the recordings that followed, they captured Susan Flores advising her son, her words recorded without her knowledge. I need you to listen to everything they say on that podcast so we can punch holes in it wherever we can punch holes. Maybe we can't. You're the one who can tell me. A mother. Not grieving. Not urging her son to come forward. Strategizing. Coaching. Coordinating a response to a podcast. That recording confirmed what investigators had long suspected. This was never just Paul. This was a family that had spent 23 years managing the story together. In February of 2020, police searched Ruben's property with proper forensic equipment. They dug beneath the back deck. They sent soil samples to a lab. That night, hours after police left, a neighbor noticed something. Ruben, Susan, and Susan's boyfriend. All 3 of them outside in the dark. After midnight. Arguing. Trailers being brought in and out. Activity concentrated directly beneath the deck that had just been searched that same day. The lab results came back weeks later. Forensic analysis of the soil samples from beneath the deck indicated the presence of human biological evidence. Forensic analysis also found fibers in the earth, black and white, matching the color of the clothing Kristen was last seen wearing. The forensic archaeologist who examined the site found a hole approximately 4 by 6 feet beneath the deck. Roughly the size of a grave. The hole was empty. But it had not always been. The ground itself told investigators, something was here. Something was removed. On April 13, 2021, 25 years after KRISTEN SMART walked into the dark, 25 years after her parents left the voicemail unreturned, 25 years after a campus police officer suggested she had probably gone to Hawaii, law enforcement arrived at 2 separate addresses simultaneously. Paul Flores was arrested in San Pedro. Ruben Flores was arrested in Arroyo Grande. Sheriff Ian Parkinson stood in front of cameras that afternoon and said something that almost never happens in a law enforcement press conference. He credited a podcaster by name. Some of that information came to light through the podcast many of you are familiar with. The same institution that had lost an earring. That had chosen not to excavate a disturbance in the soil. That institution was now acknowledging that a musician with a microphone had found what 25 years of official investigation had not. That moment was not a celebration. It was a quiet public admission of exactly how badly the system had failed. October 18, 2022. 26 years, 4 months, and 23 days after KRISTEN SMART walked into the dark. A jury filed back into a Monterey County courtroom. The Smart family sat together. Stan. Denise. Matthew. Lindsay. The same family that had spent over a quarter century driving to campus to put up flyers. Fighting a system that kept telling them to wait. The clerk read the verdict. Guilty. First-degree murder. Denise Smart reached for her daughter Lindsay. They held each other. Stan sat still for a moment, the way a person sits when something they have waited for so long finally arrives and they are not quite sure how to feel it. Later that day, he stood at a microphone and said the only thing that was true. Without KRISTEN, there is no joy or happiness in this verdict. The trial had run for nearly 3 months. Prosecutors called over 50 witnesses. Paul and Ruben Flores were tried simultaneously, same courtroom, same judge, but with 2 completely separate juries, each deciding independently. Jennifer Hudson walked to the stand 26 years after a 17-year-old girl had heard a confession she was too frightened to report. She testified through tears. She described the cold eyes. The flat voice. The words that had lived inside her for over 2 decades. She said that throughout her testimony, she looked directly at Paul Flores every time she wasn't looking at her attorney. On some level, it was vindicating to sit up there and look him in his dead eyes and for him to have to sit there and listen in silence. Several other women, referred to only as Jane Does to protect their identities, also testified about what Paul Flores had done to them in the years after KRISTEN disappeared. They described being drugged. They described waking up somewhere unfamiliar. They described piecing together what had been done to them while unconscious. Prosecutor Christopher Puel addressed them in his closing argument. They spoke for KRISTEN. They said what KRISTEN could not. They are heroes. When Ruben's verdict was read, not guilty of accessory after the fact, the relief in the Flores family was visible. For the Smart family, that second verdict landed differently. The soil beneath Ruben's deck had contained human blood. Clothing fibers matching what KRISTEN wore that night had been found in that earth. A forensic archaeologist had concluded that a body had been buried there and removed. A neighbor had watched Ruben, Susan, and her boyfriend working beneath that deck the same night police had searched it. The DNA had been too degraded to extract a direct match. And because of that single forensic limitation, a man who had refused a plumber access beneath his deck 18 years after her disappearance walked out of that courtroom free. The Smart family had waited 26 years for the full truth. They got half of it. March 10, 2023. Paul Flores stood before Judge Jennifer O'Keefe for sentencing. Matthew Smart addressed the court. Paul chose to take a life. My sister KRISTEN's life. A beautiful life. And now he must pay. Then Lindsay Smart stood up. She did not talk about Paul Flores. She talked about a chair. I sat at home staring at my sister's empty chair for over 26 years. For family holidays, for events, for every moment that should have included her. Paul had the freedom to do whatever he wanted with his family. And he still holds the key to the one thing I desperately want, my sister. Bringing her home. Not just her memory. An empty chair at every table for 26 years. That is what this case cost one family. Not just the loss itself. But the inability to grieve it properly. To close it. To say goodbye. Judge O'Keefe sentenced Paul Flores to 25 years to life. She ordered him to register as a sex offender for life. Before she concluded, she looked at him and said, "For 25 years, you lived free in the community while KRISTEN's family lived a nightmare. Your predatory behavior has spanned your entire adult life. It is necessary to remove you from society so that you can no longer prey on and victimize women." Paul Flores was transferred to Pleasant Valley State Prison in August of 2023. Within weeks, a fellow inmate attacked him. He was hospitalized, recovered, and returned. In April of 2024, he was attacked again, stabbed in the recreational yard. He has since been moved to Corcoran State Prison. He has never confessed. He has never told the Smart family where Kristen is. In January of 2024, the Smart family filed a formal lawsuit against CALPOLY University, citing negligence and wrongful death. Their attorney said simply, the university could and should have prevented her death. They can't give back the 25 years of torture wrought upon this family, but they want to see change. The case is ongoing. Kristen's body has never been found. Sheriff Parkinson has made one promise he has not yet been able to keep. This case will not be over until Kristen is returned home. We do not take a breath. We do not put this aside. On the California coast near CALPOLY, about a 10-minute drive from the campus where Kristen lived and studied and fought to stay, there is a memorial at Pismo Beach. They call it Kristen's Point of Hope. It sits at a viewpoint above the ocean she loved. The water she swam in. The coastline she would have surfed if she had been given more time. Her family goes there. Her friends go there. Strangers who never knew her go there. She was 19 years old. She dyed her hair and tried on new names and fought to stay in school when everything felt too hard and called her parents every Sunday without fail and left a voicemail about good news that her family still doesn't fully understand, and she walked into a party alone. Because she was brave enough to believe that nothing bad would happen to her. She deserved to be right about that. The system finally delivered a verdict. But a verdict is not the same as the truth. And the truth, where Kristen actually is, what her family could finally lay to rest, is still out there somewhere. Paul Flores knows. And he has chosen, every single day since May 25, 1996, to keep that to himself. Kristen Smart lived her life as an exclamation point. After 26 years, the world finally stopped to listen. If this story moved you, if you believe Kristen deserves more than silence, subscribe to Cold Case Unearthed right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a case. Leave a comment below and tell me, do you think Ruben Flores got away with too much? Do you believe Kristen's body will ever be found? And share this video, because every single view is a voice, and Kristen's family is still fighting. We don't stop until she comes home. Cold Case Unearthed. We dig until the truth surfaces.